Look at the portrait. Elizabeth I, 1592. That face, perfectly white, smooth as marble, almost inhuman in its flawlessness. The image of majesty frozen in paint. This wasn't powder. This wasn't cosmetic artistry in the way we understand it. This was lead. White lead, ground fine and mixed with vinegar, spread across her skin thick enough to crack when her expression changed. Applied fresh each morning by her ladies-in-waiting, building a mask that could survive hours of court audiences, candlelight, the scrutiny of foreign ambassadors cataloguing every detail of the Virgin Queen's appearance for their reports home. And here's what the portraits don't show. That flawless white surface was covering damage it was actively causing. The lead paste ate the skin beneath, which meant the worse the damage became, the more she needed to conceal it, which caused more damage, which required thicker application, a feedback loop with only one exit. This wasn't ignorance. Medical texts of the period warned explicitly against it. Giovanni Marinello wrote in 1562 that ceruse, the fashionable name for this poison, makes women haggard and withered in the extreme old age before they are 30 years. They knew, but for a woman whose power rested partly on embodying an ageless, semi-divine ideal of purity, the choice wasn't really a choice. The lead face wasn't vanity, it was a uniform, political necessity applied with a brush, and the lead was just the beginning. The recipe was simple. Venetian ceruse, white lead carbonate, the same compound used in paint, ground into powder and mixed with vinegar. The acidity helped it bind, helped it penetrate. That penetration was exactly what made it so effective at creating that porcelain surface. Also exactly what made it lethal. You could make it yourself, recipes circulated in household manuals, or you could buy it from apothecaries, the finest imported from Venice, which is why it carried that name. This wasn't secret knowledge, it was expensive knowledge. The best ceruse cost enough that using it was itself a display of wealth. The application took time. Face, neck, exposed chest, anywhere skin would be visible, smoothed on with the hands or applied with cloths, building coverage until the skin beneath disappeared entirely. Some accounts describe it laid on thick enough that it would crack if the wearer smiled too broadly. Think about that. Women trained to control their expressions not just for propriety, but because their faces might literally fracture. At first, it worked beautifully. Skin appeared luminous, ageless, perfect. No blemishes, no discoloration, no texture. For Elizabeth, it covered the smallpox scars from her near-fatal illness in 1562. For others, it simply created the fashionable ideal, pale skin signaling nobility, no outdoor labor, no sun damage, whiteness as status made visible. Then the trap closed. Lead destroys skin cells, causes dryness, discoloration, a greyish undertone that no amount of white paste could fully neutralize. The skin becomes pitted, develops lesions, loses elasticity, which meant you needed more ceruse to cover what the ceruse had done. Thicker layers, more frequent application, the cycle accelerating, and you couldn't stop, because stopping meant revealing what lay beneath, skin now worse than whatever imperfection you'd started trying to conceal. The damage was permanent. The only way forward was more poison. The medical understanding existed. Hugh Platt's manual from 1602 called the substance dangerous. But the same text that carried warnings also provided recipes, because the demand wouldn't stop. Social pressure proved stronger than self-preservation. Think about the morning ritual, sitting before the mirror, or before your ladies-in-waiting, since high-status women didn't apply their own cosmetics, knowing what you're about to spread on your face, feeling the texture, the weight of it, perhaps noticing your skin looks worse today than last month, applying it anyway, because court assembles in an hour and the Virgin Queen cannot appear with visible damage. This wasn't a personal failing. This was a system that required women at the highest levels of power to poison themselves as the price of remaining visible. Elizabeth's white face was as much a part of her royal costume as her crown. More permanent, actually. She could remove the crown in private. The lead was reapplied daily for decades. The only women who escaped this cycle were those who couldn't afford ceruse in the first place. Lower-class women used chalk, flour-based alternatives that didn't work as well, didn't achieve that perfect whiteness, also didn't cause lead poisoning. The wealthy were buying a more effective form of self-harm, and calling it beauty. The white lead was the foundation. What came next was the full arsenal. Mercury ointments for the skin. Solimanum, mercury sublimate dissolved in solution, applied to remove blemishes, smooth texture, lighten freckles. The goal was flawlessness, and mercury delivered results. It also delivered tremors, tooth loss, a metallic taste that never left your mouth, neurological damage that built slowly, confusion and personality changes so gradual you might not recognize them in yourself. The cruelty of mercury is that it attacks your mind while destroying your body. You become less able to perceive your own deterioration. Contemporary accounts describe women whose hands shook, whose speech slurred, who couldn't remember conversations from an hour before, still applying the ointments, still chasing smoothness. For colour, vermilion, ground cinnabar, mercury sulfide, mixed into rouge for lips and cheeks. The same base poison in a different form, this time applied to the mouth, absorbed through the delicate tissue of the lips. It created vivid red, the kind that showed up even in candlelight. It also caused cracking, bleeding, more mercury entering the bloodstream with every application. Then the eyes, belladonna, deadly nightshade. A few drops applied directly to dilate the pupils, making them large and dark and luminous. It worked. Atropine, the active compound, forces the iris to open. It also causes light sensitivity, blurred vision, and with repeated use, permanent damage. Some women went blind, slowly, over years of trying to make their eyes more beautiful while losing the ability to see. Every beauty standard demanded its own poison. Pale skin required lead. Smooth skin required mercury. Red lips required more mercury. Luminous eyes required nightshade. Each part of the face became a separate battlefield, each treated with a different toxic substance, all applied simultaneously. And then there were the teeth. Sugar arrived in England as an imported luxury in the 16th century, expensive enough that consumption was itself a status symbol. It also caused catastrophic tooth decay in a period with no real dental care. Black teeth, rotting teeth, gaps in the smile, these became markers of wealth. Only the rich could afford enough sugar to destroy their mouths. Some accounts claim women deliberately blackened their teeth to appear wealthier. Whether that's true or exaggeration, the fact remains. Elizabeth I's teeth were famously black by midlife. Foreign ambassadors commented on it in diplomatic reports. Her breath was reportedly foul. This wasn't hidden. It was visible every time she spoke, every time she smiled under that perfect white mask. The contradiction is almost absurd. Poisoning your face with lead to achieve flawlessness, while your mouth reveals decay. Spending hours on the cosmetic ritual, building that porcelain surface, then opening your mouth and destroying the illusion. But the teeth weren't part of the beauty standard in the same way. They were proof of access, of wealth, of status, a different kind of display. The full picture, a face coated in lead, smoothed with mercury, lips painted with cinnabar, eyes dilated with nightshade, teeth blackened with sugar, each substance working on the body simultaneously, each one building damage that would compound over years. This was the morning routine of a European queen. Not luxury, not pampering. A systematic chemical assault, required by fashion, enforced by visibility, repeated daily until death or disfigurement made it impossible to continue. Now correct the myth you've heard your entire life. They bathed. Medieval and Tudor Europeans washed regularly. The image of filthy, unwashed royalty is a Victorian invention, projected backward to make the 19th century seem more enlightened by comparison. London had public bathhouses called stews throughout the medieval period. Communal bathing was common until the Protestant Reformation associated bathhouses with prostitution and sin, leading to closures. Private bathing continued among those who could afford it. Household accounts from Tudor palaces show regular payments for heating bath water, for tubs, for linens. This wasn't exceptional, it was routine. Elizabeth I's supposed quote, that she bathed once a month, whether I need it or not, is likely mistranslation or sarcasm ripped from context. Household records suggest far more frequent bathing. The idea that she or her contemporaries avoided water is historically inaccurate. The confusion comes partly from changing undergarments. Fresh linen worn next to the skin was considered cleansing, changed frequently, sometimes daily among the wealthy. This was documented hygiene practice, not a substitute for bathing, but a complement to it. The real dirt wasn't on their bodies, it was in the buildings. A royal palace housed hundreds of people, courtiers, servants, guards, visitors, all generating waste with no indoor plumbing. Chamber pots and close stools everywhere. Waste disposal that couldn't keep pace with production. The sanitation infrastructure couldn't handle the load. Floors were covered with rushes mixed with herbs, a practical solution that became a hygiene nightmare. The rushes were supposed to be replaced regularly. In practice, the top layer might be refreshed while the bottom layer remained, sometimes for months, accumulating spills, food scraps, bodily fluids, and vermin. Erasmus, visiting England in 1524, described it with remarkable disgust. Floors covered with rushes, occasionally renewed, but so imperfectly that the bottom layer is left undisturbed, sometimes for 20 years, harbouring expectoration, vomiting, the leakage of dogs and men, ale droppings, scraps of fish, and other abominations not fit to be mentioned. 20 years. Think about what accumulates in 20 years of organic matter compressed under foot traffic. This was the actual filth problem. Not unwashed bodies, but spaces that became uninhabitable. Courts had to physically relocate, the entire royal household packing up and moving to another residence, while the previous one was cleaned and aired out. This wasn't rare, it was regular practice. Palaces rotated through cycles of occupation and abandonment because they periodically became too foul to occupy. The smell wasn't body odour, it was human waste, rotting food, decomposing rushes, the concentrated output of hundreds of people with medieval sewage systems. Perfumes and pomanders weren't vanity, they were survival tools. Necessary equipment for breathing in enclosed spaces filled with other humans. So the image needs correction. Queens whose bodies were washed, whose undergarments were changed, whose faces were poisoned with lead, living in buildings that became so filthy the court had to flee until they could be made livable again. The contrast is the point. They weren't ignorant of cleanliness. They practiced hygiene on their persons while inhabiting spaces that defeated sanitation through sheer scale and infrastructure failure. The problem wasn't personal, it was systemic, which makes the cosmetic poisoning even starker. They understood enough about the body to bathe regularly, to change linens, to attempt cleanliness. And still they spread lead on their faces every morning, not because they didn't know better about hygiene, but because beauty standards and political visibility demanded it. The filth was real, just not where the popular myth places it. The portraits never show this part. Skin deteriorating beneath the mask. The lead breaks down tissue, causes greyish discoloration that no amount of white paste can fully neutralise. The texture changes, becomes rough, pitted, develops lesions that won't heal because you keep coating them with the substance causing them. Women in their 20s with skin that looks decades older once the cosmetics come off. Hair loss at the front of the scalp. Not the natural recession of age, but chemical destruction of follicles from lead and mercury absorption. Those fashionably high foreheads weren't always choice, they were necessity. When your hairline recedes from poisoning, you call it fashion. You pluck what remains to make it look intentional. The wigs helped. Elizabeth owned over 80 by the end of her reign. Elaborate constructions of other women's hair, dyed, styled, built into the towering shapes court fashion demanded. They covered what the lead had destroyed. They were also hot, heavy, uncomfortable, another layer of artificial surface between the woman and the world. The tremors came from mercury, hands that shook when reaching for objects, a fine tremor that made detailed work difficult, that became visible when holding anything delicate. Some accounts describe women whose hands shook so badly they couldn't feed themselves in later years. The mercury was cumulative. Every application added to the body's total burden, and the body couldn't eliminate it fast enough. It built, over years, over decades, confusion, memory gaps. Mercury attacks the central nervous system, causes personality changes so gradual the victim might not perceive them. Contemporary observers noted women who became erratic, whose moods shifted unpredictably, who couldn't follow conversations they'd initiated. Not madness in the dramatic sense, Deterioration, the mind losing its grip while the face maintained its mask. The metallic taste never left. Women who'd used mercury preparations for years reported a constant taste of metal in their mouths, not subtle, strong enough to affect appetite, to make food taste wrong. Imagine eating every meal with that coating your tongue. Imagine it never stopping. From the belladonna, light sensitivity severe enough that bright sun became painful, blurred vision that worsened with each application. The pupils stayed dilated long after the drops wore off, meaning your eyes couldn't adjust properly anymore. Reading became difficult. Fine detail work, embroidery, writing, required more light, more effort. Some women's vision degraded to near blindness. The price for eyes that looked more beautiful was losing the ability to see beauty at all. And the teeth, black, rotting, gaps where they'd fallen out entirely. The sugar that signaled wealth also meant chronic oral pain, abscesses that couldn't be properly treated, infections that spread through the jaw, bad breath that no amount of herbs or perfume could mask. Elizabeth reportedly sucked on cloth soaked in rosewater to manage the smell. It didn't work. Ambassadors mentioned it anyway. The composite picture, a woman in her 40s or 50s, face coated in lead, thick enough to crack, hair mostly gone beneath the wig, hands tremoring, vision blurred, mouth full of blackened stumps. Metallic taste on her tongue, skin underneath the makeup grey and scarred. And every morning, the ritual begins again. Because the alternative, appearing in court without the mask, is impossible. This was visibility's cost. To be seen, to be looked at, to embody the standard required for political power meant systematically destroying yourself in ways that accumulated over time. The damage wasn't theoretical, it was physical, progressive, irreversible. The portraits show none of this. They show the mask. Perfect, eternal, flawless. That's what was meant to last. The woman beneath was never supposed to be visible. Her final years were a study in architectural cosmetics. Makeup applied, by multiple accounts, a finger thick. Not a figure of speech. Contemporary observers meant it literally. The lead paste built up in layers dense enough to measure, heavy enough to feel. What had begun as coverage became construction, rebuilding a face on top of a face that no longer cooperated. The ritual took longer now. Her ladies-in-waiting spent increasing time on the application, smoothing the paste, ensuring no gaps where grey skin might show through. The process that had once taken an hour now consumed the morning. Each layer had to dry slightly before the next could be added. The architecture had to hold. Foreign ambassadors' reports changed in tone after 1595. Earlier descriptions catalogued her features with diplomatic precision, the shape of her face, the colour of her eyes, the style of her dress. Later reports become vague, focus on her garments and jewels, avoid describing her face in detail. The omission itself is documentation. What couldn't be politely described was simply not mentioned. The wigs multiplied. 80 documented by inventory, perhaps more. Red, golden, elaborate constructions that maintained the image of abundant hair while covering a scalp where almost nothing grew. The lead and mercury had destroyed the follicles years before. The wigs were expensive, required maintenance, had to be styled to match court fashion. Another cost, another layer, another piece of the constructed image. Then the mirrors disappeared. Not all at once. Gradually, over her final years, Elizabeth ordered mirrors removed from her private chambers. The polished metal that had served as reflection was taken away. When presented with a true glass mirror, the kind that showed detail with accuracy, accounts suggest she refused to look. Some say she never looked in a mirror again after confronting what the glass revealed. This wasn't vanity. This was self-preservation of a different kind. She'd spent 4 decades building the image of the Virgin Queen, ageless and semi-divine. That image lived in portraits, in public appearances, in the carefully constructed mask she presented at court. It required her to maintain an internal sense of self that matched the external projection. A mirror showing the reality beneath the lead paste threatened that internal image. Better not to look. Better to preserve the version of herself she needed to perform majesty. The psychological mechanism is almost elegant in its tragedy. If you can't see the deterioration, you can maintain the sense of self necessary to continue. The moment you confront the gap between image and reality, the performance becomes impossible. So you eliminate the confrontation, you remove the mirrors, you preserve the delusion that makes function possible. Her health declined. Tremors, likely from mercury accumulation, periods of confusion, refusal to eat, whether from depression, from the metallic taste that made food repellent, or from some other cause, isn't documented. By 1603 she was 70, ancient by the standards of her time, and her body carried the cumulative burden of decades of systematic poisoning. She died in March after refusing medicine, after days of deteriorating clarity. When her ladies-in-waiting prepared the body for burial, they confronted the full reality. What the thick makeup had concealed, what the wigs had covered, what the elaborate court dress had hidden. The accounts don't describe specifics, respectful discretion, or perhaps horror too great to document. The standard didn't die with her. Women across Europe continued using white lead cosmetics through the 17th century, the 18th, into the 19th. The practice persisted for 200 more years after Elizabeth's death, generations of women entering the same trap, knowing the warnings, applying the poison anyway, because beauty standards and social visibility demanded it. The cycle only broke when commercial cosmetics replaced homemade preparations and lead was finally regulated. Out of products. Elizabeth's situation was extreme. Her position demanded the most perfect, most unaging image, but not unique. Every aristocratic woman who used ceruse faced some version of the same trade. Visibility for poison, beauty for deterioration, the mask for the face. In the end, her image succeeded. The portraits remain, flawless and eternal. The Ditchley portrait, the Armada portrait, the Rainbow portrait, all showing that perfect white face, that ageless icon. That's what survived. That's what was meant to survive. The woman who applied lead paste every morning for 40 years, whose face deteriorated beneath the mask, who removed mirrors rather than confront reality, who died with her body saturated with mercury and lead. She's invisible. The image consumed her. The final irony. It worked. The Virgin Queen never aged in public imagination. The lead face became permanent, frozen in paint and cultural memory. The cost was only her body, her health, her face. The image endured. That was always the point. The portraits remain, that flawless whiteness frozen forever in oil and cultural memory. Now you know what it was made of. Not just lead paste, but a beauty standard that functioned as slow poison. A political requirement that consumed the women expected to embody it. Elizabeth's ageless image cost her face, her health, decades of systematic destruction. The mask endured. The woman beneath never stood a chance.